I thought it might be interesting for our viewers to go back and talk a little bit about a general condition that was going on at this time frame, and starting with the change of presidents. This was a period of time, 1967. Don Typer, who had been the longtime president at Doane, resigned and went on to be the executive director of the Mississippi Valley College and University Association, and was replaced by Phil Heckman. Phil came from the East Coast. He was a Pennsylvania native and talked with a really strong Eastern twang, and we didn't really quite know what to make of him for a little while. Phil was a good president. He was very liberal compared to Typer, who was very conservative, and many of our board members were really conservative types. Most of them had gone through the Depression era, and when things were really, really tough, and they didn't want to take a chance on going through that again. So they were very conservative, as was Don Typer. And Phil came in, and he was ultra liberal in relation to the president that we'd had previously. More than that, Phil was about a half an actor. You never really were sure who you were talking to, whether you were talking to the real Phil or to some role that he was playing. And in fact, the matter is, when he left here 20 years later, 87 or so, he went on and had a second career as an actor in the Lincoln Playhouse in Lincoln, Nebraska, and was pretty good. I went to see a couple of his performances, and he was a really good actor. At any rate, Phil was the kind of guy who very gregarious, went out and was not afraid to meet people, was very comfortable in fundraising off campus. In fact, was much more comfortable off campus than he was on campus. Typer, on the other hand, just the opposite. I don't think he ever went off campus. And he made a habit of walking the campus every day. And if he saw a beer bottle or a can laying on the ground, he would pick it up and put it in the nearest Doane College vehicle. And so about half the time he'd be driving a van or a Doane car and come to a stop sign and put on the brakes, and here come about 6 beer bottles rolling out from underneath the seats. So it was a little disconcerting, and he was, Don Typer was liked athletics, but he had a really kind of a skewed idea about what athletics ought to be about. He was believed in the old strictly amateur kind of approach to it. He was really turned on with the Olympic Games. I don't think in the time frame that I was here, and we overlapped, I don't think he ever missed an Olympic Games. And would travel. He and his wife went to Australia. He took a sabbatical, 6 months sabbatical, so they could go to Australia for the Melbourne Games. And he was really into that. He was really into the Drake relays. He had originally come from Iowa, and so he had that Drake relays steeped into him. And I don't think he ever missed a Drake relays. In fact, kind of a funny story, after he had left Doane, and this is probably maybe 12 or 15 years later, I'm at the Drake relays, and we're running a morning afternoon session type thing, a split thing, and sent the kids home back to the hotel, and they were going to bring another group out for the afternoon races. And so I'm walking down underneath the stands going to the concession stand to get a hot dog for lunch. And who do I run into but Don Typer? And we talked for a little bit, and he just proceeded to give me hell. He ripped me one way and up one side and down the other because we were wearing at that time black and white warm-up suits, white tops, black bottoms. And he said, Doan's College, his colors are orange and black, not black and white, and I can't find them, and you better change those. And he just went on and on and on. People are standing there looking at us like, what the hell's going on here? But that was Don. He liked athletics. He had a kind of a warped sense of what reality was athletically. He conveniently forgot that we were scholarshiping kids, and that made them technically professionals. But he was big into the amateur thing. Phil, on the other hand, liked athletics, was a very competitive person. His personality was just fantastically competitive. And he came from the YMCA. That was where he was. He was in the YMCA program back east someplace. And so he had this idea of participation. Everybody should participate in all of this. And he believed in athletics as a physically improving your body and all of that. But he was a competitive guy. He just loved pickleball. And when he came here in late '60s, people had never seen pickleball. I didn't know what it was, but he got the maintenance department to paint a pickleball court on his driveway, and you can still see it there at the president's house in the driveway. And he and Bill Gross would play every weekend and take on anybody who wanted to drive by and take him on in a pickleball match. They'd be there ready to go. And he was a very competitive guy from that standpoint. And I think he understood the importance of athletics in the whole scheme of things for Doane College, what was good for Doane. And as it evolved and developed, and it was a necessary thing. And he was, I can say this for him. I don't think I ever went in and talked to him that I didn't feel like I got a fair hearing. I always felt that he didn't always agree with me, and you didn't get what you wanted necessarily, but Phil was one of the guys that if you had a legitimate request, he would do his best to fill it out. I can recall a time, and this is later on, we had been using the country club for our cross-country meets. And one year we got a different board of directors at the country club, and all of a sudden they decided no, that we weren't going to be able to run there. And they do this the day before, 2 days before we're supposed to host the district NAIA meet. And so I have to scramble around, and we have Concordia ran on their course, and I was embarrassed, man. I was madder than heck. And I dropped my membership to the country club for probably 10 years after that. I was upset. And I went to Phil, and I said, hey, we got to have a place where we can run cross country that somebody else isn't dictating it. We got to be on the campus. And I explained the whole thing to him, and he said, okay. And he called in Larry Reckling, who was the head of the maintenance department then, and said, this guy needs a cross-country course on our campus, see that it gets done. And so Larry lived right up the street from me, and so we got together, and he got Lowell Lieberspacher or somebody on our maintenance staff with a huge John Deere tractor and a brush hog cutter behind it. And he said, "You walk and I'll follow you." And so that's essentially our cross-country course. I just walked and he drove around and we mowed everything down in sight, and that wasn't, that big around. And it was, but Phil was good from that standpoint that he would, when he was available, he wasn't hard to approach. He was really good at delegating his responsibilities and delegating the work out to the second tier of administrators, and he had a good group. He was very, very good at picking the right people for the right jobs. And we had Dave Osterhout, and it was our business manager then, and Pappy Curry was the director of admissions, and Bill Gross was from the fundraising group, and it was he had a good group of people under him, and he could do that. He could let people run with an idea, and because he was probably off campus raising money. He was a heck of a fundraiser, and he was probably off campus as much as he was on or more, and it was I liked Phil, and he was always very good to me and to our program. I thought he supported us. Now the other thing at that time frame was that the general nationwide upheaval. It was chaotic. The Vietnam War was in full swing, and people were just, it was a very unpopular war, and government was unpopular. And that transmitted to the college age adults a real distrust for authority, and of course that made coaching difficult, because by definition a coach is an authority figure, and we had people who would question what we were doing and why and so forth, and so you had to be a little bit careful in terms of what you did and what you said, how you said it, and it was we had, they were burning draft cards, and the Kent State thing, we talk about police brutality and so forth. Well, they killed 17 kids on a college campus with National Guard open fire on them at this period, and it was a really chaotic period. Now, because of the geography of the thing, we were insulated, I think, here in some respects, and it wasn't as we had a sit-in or two on our campus where kids came in, they were going to take over the administration building or something. And Phil was pretty good. He was the right guy to be president in that era, because he could slick talk them. And the first thing you know, he's got them talked into going back to their classes or going back to the dorms or whatever. And we had, the Doane Owl decided they were going to quit publishing for a semester or something. They were crossways with the administration. So you know, it's. I guess my point is that upheaval and the feeling of disrespect for authority is nothing new in this country. It's an age-old thing that becomes more apparent in one era than another, but it runs through most of that history. We, because of our geography, it was the big deals at that period were the major problems were either on one coast or the other, and the colleges and universities in the Midwest and in the Intermountain West were isolated from that enough that it didn't affect us all that much, you know. And now the Title IX thing was part of it. The women were starting to feel left out, and they wanted equal rights and deserved them. You know, it wasn't any. I don't think there was very many coaches who were anti female participation. The problem was, of course, that you doubled the cost, and college administrators, for the most part, weren't ready to part with that much money. And instead of the women gaining out of it, ultimately the men, lost. So instead of adding opportunities, you were just shifting them from male to female, and the males were out to lunch. And best example I can think of is UNO. At one point, UNO had a full complement: football, basketball, baseball, track, wrestling, the whole 9 yards. Well, when Title IX came through, they weren't about to add that additional complement, that additional load for that many more sports. And so what they did to meet the guidelines, they just got rid of football, they got rid of track and field for men, got rid of wrestling. They had a national championship wrestling team, and they're at the national meet, just won the national championships, and I get a telephone call, and they told them, well, you guys don't have a program anymore. And and their track program was good. They had some really good track kids, and they just all of a sudden one day they just decided we're not going to have track anymore for men, kept it for women, and to make the numbers balance out. And I think we're still feeling some of that, the effects of some of that today, right now. And certainly, I was on the board of directors for the U.S. Track Coach Association for a number of years, and I know that the national wrestling coaches approached us one year to see if we would be willing to enter into a lawsuit with them against the NCAA and specific schools that were dropping wrestling. And it never did amount to anything, but they were pretty serious. They had gotten a lawyer, and they were going to sue the federal government for reverse discrimination type thing. So that's the kind of atmosphere, I guess, that we're going through here. It's a time when we're trying to scramble a little bit to keep up. The first 4 years, I guess, in track and field the first 4 years that we, after Title IX became the law of the land, we had female coaches. One of the deals that they were really adamant about was that the women should have the equal opportunity not only to participate as an athlete, participate in the sport, but also to have the opportunity to be the coach of that sport or a sport. And so the colleges moved in the direction, many of them moved in the direction of having female coaches for female sports teams. The first probably 3 or 4 years, I have no clue what we were doing in track and field. They hired, first of all, they hired a couple of volleyball coaches that didn't stay very long, and they just told them, well, you're going to coach track too. Well, and they worked out at different times. They went to different meets. Our schedules were not the same. And frankly, I can't even tell you who they were or what they did. They were just, completely separate from our program. Then we got a track coach, female, Carol Moseke, and she had been an Olympic team member in the discus throw from here in Nebraska someplace, back in the middle 60s, and had married Larry Frost, and he was the high school football coach here. And so she was here and she was available. So she coached track here for a couple of years. And then, 1978 or so, I guess, I took over the track and field head coaching job here in 1973. And Mr. Papik had been the football coach, athletic director, and track and field coach for a long time here. And frankly, I think he was, he'd gotten through that 38 in a row thing, and that was really a testing kind of, it was hard on him. It was a lot of work. And so I think he was about ready to check it. And in 1972, 71, the fall of 71, he decided that he wasn't going to coach football anymore and turned the football over to his number one assistant, Ray Best. And Best had a great team. A couple of years he was in the football playoffs. And Al stayed in the athletic department, stayed on as track coach. And then the next year, the 72, 73, then he decided we were having difficulty enrollment-wise. And Heckman was not very pleased with our admissions department at that point. And so he asked Al if he would go on just for a one-year deal to take over the admissions department and get it organized and get it straightened around and so that they could function more effectively and efficiently. And I think Al at that point was ready to move on from the coaching to a more administrative kind of role. And so in the spring of 72, he asked me if I would be willing and able to take over the track job. And of course I said yes, and I didn't have a clue have any idea what I was getting myself into. I'd been an assistant coach, and being an assistant coach is pretty easy life. You can do your thing, and you have the fun part of it, the relationship with the athlete, direct relation to the athlete. You don't have all the paperwork and all of the detailed stuff, and having to get along with other administrators, other coaches, as a head coach. Head coaching is different than assistant coaching. It's a lot harder, and I didn't have a clue. I didn't know what I was doing. But I jumped at the opportunity to do that, and 1973 was my first year as the head coach, and it was a disaster. It was the absolute worst year that we have had in track and field at Doane ever. A combination of my ineptitude as a head coach and some unfortunate injuries, and we had some kids, partially because I wasn't doing as good in the job as I should have as a head coach. We had some kids that bailed out on the program that were pretty good, and we wound up at the conference meet. We were holding a conference meet in those days. Nobody had in our conference had an all-weather track, and so we had our conference meet at Ed Weir Track at the University of Nebraska, which meant we had to transport all the equipment, audio-visual type equipment, plus I think they did provide standards for the pole vault and the high jump, but other than that, and hurdles. But other than that, we had to transport all of our stuff up there, and rakes and shovels and crossbars and starting blocks and even a PA system. And I'm trying to do all this stuff by myself. My assistant coach at that time was a fellow that they had hired to be an assistant football coach. That when Best came in, he hired this guy to be an assistant football coach, and he was more interested in getting a head football job someplace than he was in coaching track. His goal was to get here 1 year and out and be a head coach. And we just, the whole meet was just a disaster for us. We wound up 5th out of 6 schools. It's the first time might be the only time that we weren't in the top 3 schools in the conference. And I came back home from that, and I told Esther, I said, boy, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know that coaching is. I was ready to quit. I didn't think I would. I hadn't done a very good job. But she kind of about halfway talked me out of quitting at it, and so we went out and started recruiting, and the next year, '74, we won the conference championship. And we won it for the next 6 years in a row. It was a period when I had a lot to learn as a head coach, and it was difficult from the standpoint that here we had this brand new Fuhrer Fieldhouse, and everybody wanted to run here. We didn't run a home. We ran every single meet except the national meet. In 1971, 72, 73, we ran every single meet except the national at Fuhrer Fieldhouse, indoors. Our total indoor schedule was a home. We ran at home. And, everybody said, wow, this is great. We'll be at home. Well, that's good, except you burn up all your officials and you burn up your coaches trying to just keep the equipment moving, and all of the administration of a track meet. And it really doesn't make any difference. And most of those meets were multiple team meets, 4, 5, 6 schools, and just the administration of the meets alone was enough to keep a guy busy, and much less trying to coach his own team. So after a couple of years of that, we figured out pretty fast that this is not going to fly. We're not going to be. We won't have any officials left. We'll burn them all up. So we got into a little bit more realistic kind of scheduling, where we were at home 50% of the time, on the road 50%, and which is made it a whole lot better. I think I'm not very bright, I guess, but I did learn fairly quickly what it was necessary to win at our level. And the big thing was just going out and recruiting. That finally dawned on me that you could be the greatest coach in the United States, and if you don't have the talent, the athletes, it doesn't make any difference. You can know all of the things that are necessary to do, and your kids can do those things as hard as they can, but unless they have talent, you aren't going to get very far. And so I think that I learned that lesson pretty fast. I began to understand what Mr. Papik had understood for a long time, that recruiting quality athletes is the key to any program, the success of any program. I don't care who you are, what sport it is. If you don't have the kids, forget it. You're just spinning your wheels. You're just not going to be successful. And I don't, as I look back on it, the years that we had the greatest amount of success were the years that we had the greatest amount of talent. The ability of the coach to actually instruct and devise a training program and all that, all the stuff that you read, the X's and O's, almost anybody can do that. That's not the big thing. The big thing in coaching is getting the right people that have the talent and the drive, the willpower to be successful, and then to give them an opportunity to develop that. You let it, pretty much go at that. And we made the transition from a really, really bad year in '73 to really a pretty good year after that. And we had good years before that. 69, 70 was a really good year for us. But we, I think of some of the kids. In fact, Denny Bach was a quarter miler for us from Fairbury, Nebraska. And he just stopped in to see me yesterday. And Denny was a really good quarter miler for us, and we got talking about that year, that '73 year. He went through that with me, and we got laughing about it. It was funny now, but it wasn't very funny then. We had all kinds of problems, and mainly because of my immaturity as a head coach and understanding what all things were that were necessary to be successful. I had really a narrow viewpoint as to what my job was. I didn't realize all of the stuff that went on and had to be taken care of. We got into obviously we'd had some degree of success then with our men's program, and our women's program at that point was virtually non-existent. I mean, we had maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 girls out. Even when we won our first conference championship in 1980, I just happened to see that picture the other day of that team, and we had 15 girls on the track team at that point. So we really didn't get into any big numbers early on, and mainly because they just weren't available. One of the things that the people who were involved in the Title IX enforcement didn't take into consideration at all is that before the colleges could meet the requirements of Title IX, the high schools had to meet it because there was no pool of athletes down here. And until the high schools developed their programs so that there was a pool of athletes to choose from, the colleges were, we were scrambling just to get kids out of the classroom and out of the PE classes to stock our teams. And we, besides which, it had to be a nightmare for Mr. Papik and Bob Erickson, who was our athletic director after Mr. Papik left. And because we were in the NCAA, we were in the NAIA, we were in the NIAC, and we were in the AIAW. And all of those organizations had different eligibility rules. And they're trying to make sure that everybody, any one person, met all the rules that applied to them had to be a nightmare. And I'm sure that during that period somebody slipped through the cracks and wasn't eligible when we participated, but everybody was so screwed up at that time that it really didn't make any difference. Our first real success, I guess, from the female standpoint, was in the late 80s. No, excuse me, in the late 70s. We had our first national place winner. Anita Saltzman, Anita Burge now, was finished 4th in the AIAW National, and would have been in today's lexicon an All-American. However, at that point, the AIAW was being sued by the NCAA for the use of the term All-American. The NCAA said we have a copyright on that term, and it took a federal court ruling to say no, that's a common term and anybody can use it. And but the same way with the NAIA, they couldn't declare anybody an All-American until after this court ruling. And Anita got caught in that, and she did a nice job. She was one of the better high school athletes from Grant, Nebraska, and came here, was just a wonderful kid to try and work with. I only had a chance to work with her for 2 or 3 years, but she was a quick learner. She was a very bright girl, and athletically reasonably talented. She wasn't terrific, but she had some good talent, and she could pick things up really fast. As I remember her having trouble learning how to hurdle. She was not a natural hurdler, and she was having trouble getting to the first hurdle on step. And one day, it was indoors during the winter, and so she said, "Would you come in and help me on a Saturday?" And we spent a whole day Saturday working on hurdles. And it was the first time I'd ever worked with a three-point start. And that was, in the 70s, so it was before it was very common. And we got her to the first hurdle and over it and got this thing straightened around. And after that, she never had a bit of trouble. It was just one of those breakthrough moments when she picked the thing up and just ran with it. And I think that at that point in time, she was really the first Doane athlete that got involved seriously with the multi-event thing and as an event. And of course, we've had a lot of success with those, both male and female, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. I don't know that we didn't spend the amount of time on that event that we do now. I mean, that's a specific group of people that are designated as multi-eventers, where all the multi-eventers prior to that time, to this more recent time, were all hurdlers or jumpers or something initially, and then they just gravitated to the multi-events later on. It was that first part of my career here as a head coach was really went fast, as I was so busy trying to learn what being a head coach was all about, that I just, it just seemed like it flew by. And the kids that we were very fortunate in 1974 to pick up a group of very, very talented kids, and they stuck it out. They stuck here for 4 years, and they weren't leaving. And we picked up a couple of transfers, and it was that were really very strong, and particularly in the later 70s. And it was a period of real education. It was a big change period here on the campus. Phil Heckman was big into building buildings. We probably built more buildings during his 20-year tenure as president as any time in the history of the college. Put Earl Walker to replace the old Merrill that burned down. Communications building, Fuhrer, Sheldon, Hall, women's dorm, the quads. Those were all built during Phil's tenure as a president. And so things were, he liked to say, well, the place, I'm going to keep the place looking like a battlefield, as if it was all tore up at some point in time, all during that period. And it was, from that standpoint, it was exciting. And it was always something new and different going on. I think we started getting more comfortable with the idea that we were going to be a winner. That was one of the big things with Mr. Papik. He was a winner, and for many of us, winning was not a usual thing. And that we were, when we did win, it was wow, But I think we got more comfortable with the idea that we're going to be number one and going to have the quality program in the area. And then our women got into that fairly early in their existence here. The first couple, first 5 or 6 years was pretty difficult. We were just trying to find our way, and we didn't really know what was going on. It was a learning period for everybody. But once our women got to the point where they were starting to be very competitive, then it just took off, and it became an accepted fact on our campus that we were going to have good women's track. And it was the 80 was our first NIAC championship for women. We won the men's and women's indoor that year. And from then on, boy, it just kind of grew like Topsy.